Our participants are muted and we'll get the recording started. Good afternoon. Welcome to Remote Work Wednesday. On behalf of the Remote Online Initiative and the K-State Research and Extension Community Vitality Team, we're glad to have you with us. I'm Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd Institute for Rural Development at K-State Manhattan. Big thanks to Deborah Cole, who is our Program Leader Coordinator for K-State Research and Extension Community Vitality, and Jan Steen, our fellow state specialist in Community Vitality, who's helping us today. This is a project of the Remote Online Initiative, ROI, and the website is, kansasremotework.com, which has information about the remote work certification programs where a person can be certified as a remote worker or remote work team leader. Today's one in our series of Zoom calls, open for anyone interested in remote work. Our goal is simply to learn about the opportunities and challenges of working remotely or in a hybrid context for those who choose it. We do these on the second Wednesday of each month. It's a free call. We encourage you to join us. Today, we welcome Deb Carlson Ohlde of the North Central Regional Planning Commission as our presenter. I like to say that Deb was working remotely before it was fashionable because she was an early adopter in this work. She comes to us from Clyde, Kansas, graduated from K-State with a BS in agricultural economics and a master's in public administration. Completed the Economic Development Finance Professional Certification through the National Development Council, Community Development Institute at the University of Central Arkansas, and is a trained entrepreneurial learning facilitator. Deb first joined the North Central Regional Planning Commission in 1994 and served in various roles, culminating as Assistant Director through 2016. She also served as Director of Grower Services for Kansas Corn and rejoined the North Central Regional Planning Commission in 2022, where she is Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives today. Not only has she worked remotely for an extended period, she also is a graduate, completed the remote online class, the ROI class that I just mentioned from the previous website. And she successfully got a grant to provide scholarships for more people in her region to take the remote classes. So she has been a key player in remote work and in assisting the development of remote work opportunities for citizens in North Central Kansas. So with that, Deb, we'll turn over the floor to you, and we look forward to hearing about your experiences.
Very good. Thank you, Ron. Appreciate the generous introduction and setting the stage and kind of laying the groundwork for a short conversation today, at least about my experience as a remote worker. And I would say we'll spend a lot of my time today probably talking about this from a work from home perspective, because that's been primarily my experience. But I'll talk a bit about what some of the other structures might look like in that realm as well. As you mentioned, I have a keen interest in remote work and the opportunities that it provides to individuals and employers to, build their staff, build their skill set that they can reach, because they're not required to all be in one single geographic area. And I'm also just really a big proponent from the ability to balance your work and the rest of your life, the other pieces of your life. And that certainly was what prompted me to be interested in this a very long time ago, because I did have an interest in the flexible time and spending more time with my family and being able to be active in my community, but really being drawn to the position at the Planning Commission at that time that I lived an hour and 20 minutes away from and couldn't imagine, driving every week. So as you said, for me, very early on in the mid 90s, I started out when I went to work for them working from home. Typically went to Beloit to our main office one day a week, but the rest of the time I was based at home. So it was a different world when there wasn't email and Zoom calls and all of those things. Kind of hard to imagine, but it worked. It was just different than it is now, for sure. And my experience, I have at one time or another worked remotely, either as an employee, as a contractor, or as a consultant. So I've sort of seen that from multiple angles as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the slide deck that I have, and we'll kind of walk our way through these. And again, if Ron, if you notice that anybody has a question or whatever, certainly jump in, and I will try to respond to that at the time rather than later on. So as I mentioned, my experience has been primarily work from home, but there are other ways of doing this. And my work from home experience has been in a situation primarily where I am far enough away from the base of operation for who I'm working for that I don't want to make that commute every day, and don't consider that to be reasonable. And also have the, I guess, added advantage that because I'm out and about, I have a perspective for who I'm working for that comes from another part of the area that they're also serving. So there's a positive there as well. Some individuals work remotely from a co-working space. Some work for a company like I am right now with the Regional Planning Commission, where it's close. And so again, I go to the office, working a hybrid schedule right now. I go to the office 2 days a week, and my office here in my home where I am today is home based the other 3 days of the week. But I also travel fairly extensively within our region, and just within the state of Kansas as well. Some individuals are working remotely from a company that's fully dispersed, and our staff is fairly dispersed at the Planning Commission, but we have a core group of, I would say, 6 to 7 individuals who are mostly in that office every day. The rest of us are either there very little or kind of similar to my situation there as in a hybrid capacity. Another aspect I think that comes into play is, working for a company where maybe you're a smaller branch or an offshoot of a major corporation, and so you may have an office and a few office mates that you do work from, but you may have other individuals that are part of your team that are in other offices scattered around, the Midwest, or actually anywhere in the world, the way things work these days. Kind of a unique thing that has happened just by evolution in our office. I have a coworker who's worked with us for about 5 years, and she actually lives in South Africa. When she moved back there from Kansas, we kept her, and so we have remote people like me that are an hour from the office, but we also have Amanda, who's a completely different time zone, and we work well with her as a team as well. So thinking about those structures, I sort of dove into that a moment ago, just as it flowed with the other things I was commenting on. I consider myself to have a home office as my home base, but am out a great deal as well. Like I said, serving clients that we work with from the Planning Commission, primarily in Kansas, but occasionally out of the state. And then, some individuals are working, their home office is all that they have. An individual that I am chatting with right now who's thinking about, making this leap has a job offer from a company where she will be strictly working from home all the time. There will not be any obligation to be in an office anywhere. Another individual I know here in Clyde just took a remote position, and she is traveling to their home office, which I may be wrong now, but I think it's in Wisconsin, and she will go there probably one day every couple of months, or not one day, excuse me, for a few days, probably every couple of months, but mostly will be working from her home office as well. And then again, kind of my situation right now too, my home office is home base, but I do go to Beloit usually one day, at least a week, and oftentimes it's two. I will tell you that, for me, the hybrid schedule is perfect. I still enjoy being in the office, having camaraderie and a chance to, communicate face to face with individuals in the office. But I really love my days at home where it's quiet and I can really knock out the work, and feel like I'm being super productive without just some of the office distractions and things that can happen as well. So early on, when I first started doing this, I would have a lot of questions about, could I do this? Would this work for me? And I think it's a really it's really important to ask yourself some key questions when you're thinking about diving into this opportunity. I've posted a few of them there just to get kind of the juices flowing and things to think about. But again, I'm in my home office by myself several days a week. So you have to be very self-motivated and self-driven in terms of being able to get up, get into the office, kind of put on your work hat, leave the other things that might be distractions in your home behind, and be able to, to work independently, because it's not as easy to, walk into the next office and say, hey, I have an issue with this, or I'd like to talk this over with you. Although we do communicate virtually quite a bit, it's still really important to be able to have that motivation intrinsic to you to get up and get after it every day. I think the other thing I hear most people talk about is, can I segment my work and my personal life? Because they think it's difficult to imagine being at home and not being completely distracted by the things that they might have around them. And one of the ways that I have always managed that is I do have a dedicated office, and so I'm not in my dining room at the table or whatever. I'm in my space that I consider my workspace, and that helps me to make those separations. Having said that, I definitely have spent, 25 years when I'm making a new cup of coffee or whatever, throwing a load of laundry in the dryer and moving it from the washing machine to the dryer, because it's a easy way to kind of blend work and personal life when you're in that space. And again, you can either watch the coffee pot brew, or you can go do something for a couple of minutes that makes it a little bit more effective for you as a family person as well. So pros and cons, I think, as I mentioned in sort of in my introduction, I think for me, the flexible, work hours was a big part of this as an advantage. I have, over the years, when I had three smaller children, if one of them was home, sick from school or whatever, by the time they were, 6, 7, or 8, you could park them on the couch. They were going to be doing that anyway, and I could still get some work done, because I had my home office and was available to them, but I didn't lose that entire day of work. Love the no commute idea. Those just feel like found hours in my opinion. If I were commuting to Beloit, every day I would add at least an extra 6 hours to my work commitment because of the commute. And I think if you do end up working for a fully remote company, and doing the type of work that lends itself to, you could in theory relocate somewhere with your family, and you would still be able to take your job with you. It's if it's fully remote and your company is okay with that. So again, I think when you have two individuals with careers, it's wonderful from a family perspective to be able to have that option to one of them perhaps needs to relocate, and the other is able to take their position with them. Um, that first bullet point under the cons, I always laugh at that. People are like, wow, your kids were home with you and you didn't have daycare. And that's completely not right. If you can imagine trying to, work with toddlers around, it's like, that's not really reality. We still had daycare. But again, some advantages when someone was homesick, or there was an unexpected maybe day off of school because of snow or something like that, it still worked better, for sure. But yeah, you're still probably going to have daycare unless you have kind of a narrow window of what you're working on, that it might lend itself to not doing that, but probably going to need that. I think the other thing that becomes the negative, a couple of negatives would be the temptation to, always be in the office because it is there, and I have an extra hour after supper, I'll just go in there and knock out something else. And the same flexibility that can be a pro can be a con from that regard. If you're really pressured on a project or a deadline or something, it's right there, and you have a tendency to not get away from it. Having said that, I think probably more of an issue if you're working for a company that hasn't done this before, thinking about instituting a work from home policy or a remote work policy. There is that temptation from coworkers and even perhaps your supervisor or your boss to think, well, are you really working, all day? How do I know that? Because I can't see you sitting at your computer. And I think that's where some of the things I'll mention here a little later on, good communication and having those discussions about just deliverables and the outcomes that you're looking for, rather than just, so many hours or so many minutes in a seat in front of a computer come into play as well. I do think it's interesting and important to think about distinguishing between, do I really just want to work from home as an employee, or do I want to become an entrepreneur and, do some consulting? And two different worlds in terms of sort of your level of responsibility for to someone else besides yourself, but also taking that big leap of faith of going out on your own, like I did for a few years, and freelancing or consulting. I loved that part of my career, but I also knew quickly that I really missed the interaction with an office team that I routinely had the ability to develop relationships with and work with. You're still doing that as a consultant, but it's sort of working with one group for a while and then maybe moving on to another, and I was missing that longer term working relationship with people, which was part of the reason why I opted to move back into that realm rather than stay as a consultant. But I think that's an important distinction, whether or not you're going to be asking your current employer to let you work from home part of the time or to work remotely part of the time, whether you're going to look for an employer somewhere else who would let you do that, or if you're considering going out on your own. It's kind of a different point of decision, and probably worth considering. And again, I've given you a few tips here for some things that you might want to do to see where you fit the best in those two different scenarios. All right. Make a list or two or three of things if you're diving into this direction, pros and cons. And I think a couple of things I'm going to emphasize on the right hand side of the screen. How is this going to impact your finances? Especially if you're thinking about going out on your own as an entrepreneur, what is that going to impact, at least for a short term, as you build up your book of business? What's it going to do in terms of your health insurance and some of those kinds of things? And do you have the support of your family, especially if you're going to be living and working in that same space with them? Do you have that support? And they understand what you're going to be doing, taking over a room for an office, and that there's going to be maybe a sign on the door that says, I have to talk to you later because I'm working right now. A little different vibe in your house that is again worth it, but can sometimes be surprising to people when they first dive in, I think, to that realm. I think it's important to talk to friends, not only family, but also colleagues and friends who know you well, and give them an opportunity to say if they think this is something that you can be successful in that environment and in that structure. It's good to take advice from those who know us best about our personality and how we approach our work, and whether or not they can work in that environment successfully. Okay. I'm a big fan. You saw maybe a couple of slides back, Clifton Talbert's book about Who Owns the Ice House, which I think, on a completely tangent, is a great parenting book, but it's also really a great way to experiment and explore with becoming an entrepreneur, or with anything that you might be thinking about making a change in your life. And he really recommends, starting small with experiments. And that's what I would suggest as well. Maybe your current employer will let you work for one day a week from home, and you can test the waters and see how that, feels for you. Think about what a day might look like in your life if you were working from home rather than having a commute. But experiment if you have that opportunity. Instead of just diving in, think about ways that you can maybe make that happen. Taking the remote work class is another really great way to do that. You're going to hear from people who have been doing this, also have a chance to ask questions, and I think get a better feel for what that's really like for you, what that will turn into on a day-to-day basis that's maybe different from what you're used to. I'm going to talk a little bit later on just about accounting and legality. So I think I'll kind of skip that next section that's on that slide. And I hit on this again, consult with your people. These are the folks who live with you all the time. You need to talk to them about what that's going to be like when, again, when you may have an office with a door shut, or you may be, needing to take calls during the day that they can't interrupt, or you're on a Zoom and they need to keep the dog quiet, or, whatever. There's some responsibilities there for them and a change in their environment as well. And they need to be supportive if you are going to turn into a work from home person on a regular basis. Okay. One thing I always suggest when people ask me questions about working remotely that think that they're interested, I always suggest that if you love what you're doing and love who you work for, and your work lends itself, some don't, obviously, but if your work lends itself to working remotely, don't bypass the idea of asking your current employer if they would let you potentially work from home, like I do, part of, a hybrid schedule or whatever. There's definitely, um, there's definitely pros and cons to pro and con attitudes out there about whether or not it's feasible and workable and advisable and all those things. Feel out your current employer. They might be willing to let you do something a day or two a week, and you would find out whether or not, hey, this is working for me or it's not. But within those cases, be prepared to take it slow. If they've not thought about this, don't have anyone else doing it. It's going to open the door for others who might want to as well. They may have some positions that it wouldn't work for them to happen. So how are they going to balance those who might request it but actually can't do it versus those who could, and they're interested in being supportive. So don't miss the opportunity to ask that question if you already love the job that you have. I mentioned earlier, going out on your own as a consultant. I think again, it's thinking about what do your finances really look like? Do you have time to take what might be a slump in earnings as you start to build up your book of business? Can you start to do that somewhat on the side? And then, how do you negotiate that with your employer when you're having to go to them and say, hey, I might be starting a side gig where I don't see it conflicting, with my work here, but I just want you to be aware this is what I'm going to be doing some on the side, and getting your feet wet, and again building up that book of business as you move ahead. And I think it's important. This is a good time to mention, I have a very knowledge-based kind of job. I do a lot of grant writing and project management. And so my job, literally, if I have a computer, I can do it anywhere. Some positions are just simply not like that, and they are not, remote work or work from home friendly. And in those cases, you probably are going to have to, think about what skill set you have that could translate into a position that does work that way. Yeah, home office basics. Oh my goodness, low noise area, distraction free, large enough to sit at your desk, have multiple monitors, which I do. I have 3 of them right now. Keeping yourself comfortable, investing in a good chair, all those things that your employer might be doing for you. Don't skimp on those when you're working from a home office, because your body will thank you later. Wanted to just touch really quickly on communication in a work from home situation. I think there's there's that ongoing nagging, are you really working? What are you doing? You didn't answer my email in the first 12 seconds after I sent it. So apparently, you've been sleeping for the last 2 hours. You have to be aware of that mindset. And I think one of the ways that you do that is by being in good communication with people and setting expectations. That I will check my email at least 3 times a day. You'll hear from me within 2 hours. If it's urgent, text me. But mostly negotiating with your employer, what are the deliverables and what are the things that I'm supposed to be doing and knocking out, and what are my deadlines for doing that, and continuously effectively meeting those deadlines and turning out the deliverables that you have agreed to is probably the best way to establish that comfort zone and that trust level, because it's really a trust issue. We're excuse me, we are negotiating this new arrangement where you're going to be working from home, and we need to trust that you're getting your work done and that you're doing what you say you will. And that might mean, if you're like me, You maybe work a little bit of different hours than what everybody does, which leads nicely into this conversation about, this asynchronous work life. I mentioned our coworker who's in South Africa. It's an 8-hour, I think, time zone difference. And every time when we switch from daylight savings time and back, we are all like, okay, now wait a minute, what is it now? And are we how many hours before and after? And we always have to work it out all over again after the time zones or after the daylight savings time switches. But there's ways if you're working with people who are not in the same location as you, there's ways to, use tools with email that, delay sending it until it's their work hours. It's also important to remember that if you are not physically in an office with someone, it's okay to, pick up the phone and have a phone conversation. Just have a one-on-one Zoom with them, just so that you can actually see faces and have a better conversation. You have to think about what will keep you in communication and feeling like you're part of a team without overdoing that if it's not something that's necessary. And I've always over the years told people that if I have worked with someone for a really long time, that trust level is already there. So I don't need nearly the face-to-face time with them that I do someone who I'm just trying to build a relationship with. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind too. It doesn't always come overnight, but after a while, when you get in a groove and you've developed that trust, then it flows and can flow really well. I mentioned here, schedules, share your normal work hours. I'll be real honest with you. For me, I hit my stride usually after lunch. And, so from like noon to about 7 is really when I do my best work. On days when I work from home, a lot of times I'm not in the office until, maybe 8:30. If I'm, going to be in my office in Beloit, I'm in the Beloit office by 8 o'clock because that's the hours that we keep. But I will maybe shave off a little bit on the front and then I might over my noon hour take a break and I might do my lunch hour at 11. So then when I hit my best working time, I'm really working solidly for those 6 or 7 hours when it's my most productive. And also that leaves me with those evening hours when, how that goes. Then your email stops pinging, your phone's not ringing. It's like, oh, I've got 2 hours here where, you're really getting a lot accomplished because most people have ended their workday by 5 or so. If you are out on your own, don't forget to find a good lawyer and a good accountant before you set up your structure and determine how you're going to organize yourself as a consultant. You will find that there's some pros and cons to all of those and some mistakes that you don't want to make in terms of your taxes. So again, that's my plug for looking at those things early rather than later to make sure that that you're in good standing on those accounts as well. Building a network is super important. You don't have your obvious network in the office anymore, potentially. So continuing to cultivate those relationships you've had for years and not letting those slide, but also still going to going to conferences, going to lunch with people, finding those individuals that you need to connect with and making it a conscious effort to do that. So again, super important because it may not be happening, automatically. So kind of winding down here a little bit, a slide that I thought was important to put in there. And, this isn't what I thought it would be. I tried it and it's like, yikes, there's just aspects of this I had no idea. Number one, I think give it some time. Hopefully you're not in this boat. If you did some of the things I suggested early on, you took it, by baby steps and you did some research ahead of time. But again, this is a perfect example of, in my case, where I discovered, hey, hybrid is what works for me. I really like that 1 or 2 days a week in the office. And, maybe you thought you wanted to go 100% remote, but you've realized that, yeah, I'm kind of missing people. So, hey, go back to the office a couple days a week. Go find a co-working space and, work with people there just so you're out in the open and you have a little different scenery. Go work in a coffee shop. During the time when I was consulting, I did that typically 1 day a week for at least a half a day. I would go out somewhere else and even if I wasn't meeting someone, just for a difference of scenery, and you know, being out and about and doing something a little bit different. It created opportunities for me to run into people, but also was just a way to, you know, kind of shake out my day or my week and kind of bring some variety to it as well. You know, how do you do brainstorming sessions when, you know, you're working from home, because you do need other people to bounce ideas off of? You know, lunch is out. I just mentioned this, lunch is out, go out to coffee. Don't let those opportunities to, you know, stay involved with a professional association. Join your local chamber. Maybe you haven't ever before because you were commuting somewhere else. Get involved with your local business association. You might you might find yourself needing subcontractors for some of the work that you're doing. Again, assuming if you're out on your own, you know, think about staying in touch with those people, even if you don't have an immediate need for another subcontract with them, but just, you know, developing that pool of people that you can call on when you do and that you can stay in touch with is important, or was important to me at least, for sure. I kind of hit on this already. Identify your best work hours. If you're working for an employer, I think it's important that you communicate that to them. You know, hey, I'm probably going to work 9 to 6 instead of 8 to 5 because those are my better hours, assuming that they're okay with that. But you know, pay attention to yourself a little bit. When am I getting most of my work done? When do I feel the most energy? When am I dragging? Schedule the things that work best around your best working time. So, you know, make those phone for me. I might make phone calls and answer email and things in the morning because that works well for me. And then I can knock out project work in the afternoon. Again, mentioned this a bit before, you know, asynchronous work. You know, what does that look like? Again, delayed response on email so that, you know, you're not emailing people in the middle of the night or in their non-work time, can be important. Some people don't care. Others, it's really important to them that you know, respect when you're communicating with them. Using out of office messages. I always try to give people an idea. You know, we share in our office, we share a Google Calendar. I think a lot of people do that. But it's a really good way to communicate when you're out. So, you know, hey, I may be working from home, but oh, I had a doctor's appointment this morning. So Deb will be back in this afternoon. And then I'll hear from her probably or get my email response from her this afternoon without having to just constantly update people on what it's you know, what your schedule is and well, why haven't I heard from you? Because you're usually really responsive and, you know, wondering where you are or what's up. So it's really easy to be a slave to your phone. I'm talking to myself here because it sits right next to my desk and it's very easy. You know, every time a text pops up or if you see that someone's messaged you or whatever, to get distracted by that. And I think getting away from that's important because many times it can wait. And if you haven't taken advantage of the opportunity to just block time out to look at your phone and look at email, I think that's important, and maybe even more so when you're working remotely, because you don't want to get kind of sucked down that hole of all of those email and other notifications and things that are coming your way. We like to use a separate response platform for work internally so that I know if people who work on my direct team are needing an answer to a question versus just clients and others who we may, you know, defer and, you know, maybe answer those emails 2 to 3 times a day. If somebody's on staff and they're reaching out to us, we want to get right back to them. So we have a little different process in order to allow them to do that and make sure that we keep other people, you know, on track with their work as well, because they might be waiting from us for a response. So. All right, that's sort of how I organize my day and what led me on this journey that I have been on for a really long time and continue to love and appreciate. Always happy to network with anyone who has an interest in remote work, working from home, and the advantages, but also getting over some of the stumbling blocks or speed bumps that you can encounter as well. So appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. And if anyone has questions, would certainly be happy to visit with you as well.
Thank you so much, Deb. Outstanding presentation. Virtual round of applause here from me. You can tell you really lived this. You really experienced this from as a freelancer and as a hybrid worker. Really Really appreciate that. I happen to be in Great Bend today at their workforce summit. Was just in a breakout session discussing remote work, and you touched on um, deliverables and building trust. One of our participants in this session commented about an employer that had a timer on their computer for their remote workers. And if there weren't keystrokes in 45 minutes or so, the computer turned off. Um, and and he commented that felt kind of big brother-ish. Um, but he said it also served as a reminder for those people to get up and take a stretch. And, it was time to get away from the screen. I think in our ROI classes, we emphasize the deliverable, and tracking the project, letting your supervisor and your team members know where you are on the project, and, will you hit the goal, or what changes need to be made. But any comment that you'd make about that accountability piece versus, say, flexibility?
No, I think that is the balance right there. I mean, that you've hit on that. And I think for me personally, I would have a hard time probably working in that environment where they were, like you said, monitoring keystrokes, but it's definitely a thing. And particularly with some types of remote work that are, very focused on, like customer service responses and that sort of thing. There, how many people are you responding to within the hour? And I totally understand that, I've not been in that world, but that world is definitely out there. And what has cropped up, which you maybe have seen, there's memes and things out there now about, the things you can buy that make your mouse move because, so it's like you're still not sitting there, but the mouse is moving. So they think you're sitting there. So yeah, it's a challenge, to keep it, again, to balance the two, and I happen to live in a world where, are my projects getting done? Did the grant get submitted on time? How many grants were successful? It's tracked that way. But we also do, we still do timesheets because we're logging it against various funding sources. And so, um, it is it's a balance between the two. And I think if you're delivering and hitting on all cylinders with the things that you're supposed to be accomplishing, you're obviously putting in time and effort and and doing it well. And that's the best measure, I think, of the type of work that I do.
Very good. There's an excellent question here in the chat. What has helped you to form connections with coworkers when working remotely? How do you build those connections, particularly in the case where you work with people you haven't worked with in person? There was another person in this breakout session I just attended that shared some success stories of, valued employees who, spouse takes a job somewhere else, but they retained that person, but they already had a relationship. How do you build
Right.
a relationship when you don't have that track record of experience with them?
Yeah. I think that is a challenge. I remember hearing an individual that took a new job right during the COVID shutdown, and it was actually a government job. And so the shutdown was for a lot longer period of time. And boy, she expressed that it's like, I've never seen these people, literally have never seen them face to face other than like we are right now in a box. And I'm gonna say old school. My answer is, surely you can find a time to have some face to face. On some level. You might not be able to if they're 8 states away. But to the extent that you can, I think the other piece that some people don't value or appreciate as much as they should is, um, you know, happy hour, or for lack of a better, those times when you get together and it's not just because you're supposed to be knocking something out in a meeting. And it's not the same, but doing some things that build team and build relationship, even by Zoom, but that are not focused on work, where you're learning something new together, and maybe you're working as a team because you're attending something from Kansas Leadership Center together, but it's pulling out some of those aspects of your life that are not just work. And I would say that probably the other thing that is maybe first on maybe further down on the list, but also can be effective is the quicker that you can come together, I think, to work on something, have a purpose together, you'll pretty quickly learn a lot about each other's work styles, and you'll learn a little bit more about what the person likes to do and doesn't like to do, and how they communicate and what their preferred communication is. So, even if it's something small, I think pulling that new person into some sort of a group project where there's that requirement that together we're going to work on this and have this at the end as what we're charged with delivering is helpful as well.
Thank you. I'm reminded of a former coworker of mine who since retired, who would unfailingly begin every gathering, every meeting with some sort of a team building thing. I mean,
Yeah.
even if it was just, what's the one thing you're proudest of in your family today, and go around the room.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to do that too.
Yeah, just to
Yes.
build a little relationship on a personal level before you get to the task.
I think the other thing that can be very helpful with that is to just be more overt in terms of communicating about, would you rather I email you or send you a text? You have to ask those questions instead of like, well, I like email, so I'm going to email you all the time. Well, I'd really rather you texted me, or I'd really rather that you messaged me. And just I shouldn't say pry, but really be overt in asking those questions. What do you prefer? When would you prefer to have phone calls? And really get to know work style and the way that people approach work that way, which I think happens kind of by osmosis in an office, but it has to be worked on more deliberately when you're not together.
An element I picked up from the leader class from our remote online initiative class that's targeted to supervisors of remote work was making sure that the communication channel fits the need. If it's a sensitive issue, if it's a little bit of a
Right.
contentious issue,
Absolutely.
maybe that's a time to get on the phone and have that
Mhm.
conversation. If it's a quick response, send a text. If it's a little more detailed, you need to document, then
Yep.
use email. And so
Yep.
you need to be proficient in all those, but you need to pick the
Yeah.
channel that fits the need at the time.
Yeah, that's the modern equivalent of, read the room, right?
Yeah.
Does it feel like this should be a text? Probably not. This is a serious topic, or it's going to take more words than you can do in a text, and so yeah, you need to figure that out for sure.
There was another interesting thing that popped up at this remote work breakout session I was just in. One of the employers talked about, I don't know, a stipend and allowance for providing work equipment for the remote worker. And that really is not an area I've explored. As I recall, that their internet service was on them, but if a person was working remotely, they had a certain allowance for a laptop, for example.
Right.
And I wasn't very familiar with that in many cases.
Yeah, the approach that we take is a little bit I get maybe a 50-50 sort of thing. But there's some flexibility there. I mean, obviously the computer that I'm on at home right now is a company computer, a laptop. Laptops make that way different than back in the desktop days. Good grief. That's, you're taking it with you everywhere anyhow. But in my case, I also use my personal computer some, partly because in some cases it's smaller, it's lighter weight. I like to travel with it, and so I'm able to do either one. We do provide a small cell phone allowance because I use my cell phone exclusively, but I also have always been hardcore about I'm not carrying two phones. So if I'm using this, give me a little bit towards what I'd be paying anyway for my personal cell phone, and I'm perfectly happy with that. But I'd rather not carry two. So again, there's that compromise, like anything else, negotiating, I think, between what the employee values and what the company can do. We also have IP phones. So people in our Beloit office can, I personally, I don't use one. I use, just like I said, my cell phone, but for some individuals, they prefer to not do the cell phone. So they have an IP phone that sits on their home office desk. And so, even if someone calls for us in the Beloit office, they can just patch that right through to that individual who's working somewhere else. And we also have an office in Salina in addition to Beloit. So that's another reason why that's, super helpful. So I think some of that is negotiated, but yes, not uncommon. And particularly if you're fully remote, I think there's, and depending on the type of job, definitely an expectation that they will set you up with a home office that is workable. The individual I mentioned here in Clyde, she has talked about that they, provide her with what she needs in order to be able to establish her home office.
Yeah, there's another great question in the chat. What are your thoughts on being
Mhm.
on camera versus off camera? Some staff aren't comfortable being on camera. Should they be encouraged to be on some? Is it okay for them to stay off at all times? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I would say I'm not hardcore on that one way or the other. I personally, I like to see people's faces and I like to see expressions and reactions. And so for me, I like to, if we're going to have a meeting, I like to have the ability to see people. Having said that, I just last week, an individual in our group that we were on our regular weekly meeting, and she was struggling through a cold, and I'm guessing she was still in her jammies, but she was, she was wanting to be part of the group, and I'm like, it's perfectly fine. Leave your camera off. She's like, I'm leaving my camera off because my hair's in a messy bun and I'm in my pajamas, and I just started my day later today, and so that's great. Totally get that as well. And I think it's when it's a small group, if I'm doing this with two immediate coworkers and we're trying to hammer out something on a project, I'm really all about the camera then. Because honestly, if you aren't turning your camera on and you're not screen sharing, then it really could be a phone call. You don't really need to be on, Zoom or Google Chat or, whatever platform you're using. Could be a phone call. But again, I think there's reasons to go both directions, and it's totally justifiable sometimes to not. And if I'm in a big group with a webinar, my camera's probably not going to be on either, because I might be, looking over here because I'm using, another screen and doing something else, but I'm, engaged with this, but I'm taking notes over here, and it's distracting that way too.
It's very helpful. So it's context, it can be context specific that way as well.
And another good question to ask, just like the, what do you prefer, a text or an email? It's that same question of, are you uncomfortable being on camera? Does it distract you to see yourself on the camera? Which I've had people tell me that too. I need to turn my camera off because I can't, it really messes with my mind when I'm watching myself on camera. And so they want to leave it off. And so I think part of that's discussion too. Like why? What's the why behind that?
Very good. Very good. Well, that's very helpful. One of the key differences I've read in the research between in-person versus a distributed conversation, workplace conversation, is the nonverbal cues, the body language that you
Right.
just don't get. And so I think particularly with a small group, there is value in having at least that face-to-face interaction. As you say, the larger the group, maybe the less relevant that is.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone? Don't see any other questions in the chat. Deb, we really appreciate your partnership through the years and your great work that you're doing
Absolutely.
here and your excellent observations here today. So again, we thank you. Thank you very much. Our next remote work Wednesday will be on December 13. We were talking about how to build relationships with remote workers. Would you believe that there is a company that specializes in virtual team building experiences? the Confetti Company. We'll have a representative with us next month. Their slogan is, "We help companies build stronger cultures by providing shared experiences for a distributed workplace." So I think this will be a fun session. It is possible to have fun and shared experiences with remote and hybrid workers. So if you want a preview, you can actually go to www.withconfetti.com.
Love it.
Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
No, I was just gonna say, I have a quick question for you. December 13th is a Friday, so should that
Oops.
have maybe been the 11th?
No doubt it is December 11th. It should be, yes, it is Friday, December 11th. So apologize for it's Wednesday, December 11th. So apologize for the typo. So please join us on Wednesday, December 11, 2024 for our last Remote Work Wednesday of the year. Thanks again, Deb, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful Remote Work Wednesday. Have a great day.